This is my first solo episode, which the tech team can hear me. Hi. I was wondering why I booked this room. I hadn't really thought about it because I'm packing up to Europe. I'm going to Europe tomorrow for a couple of months. And then I see on the bookshelf, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. I'll start with why. Whole Collective is something that has been ruminating, that has been brewing, that has been calling my name for a few years. And I've always struggled to really articulate what it was. I've been through iterations of refining what it is and how I came to be here. But the story, because I think that's how life is made up of, is stories within ourselves, with each other. It's how we tell our history. It's how we relate. It's how we heal. It's with stories. And my story begins 10 years ago. Obviously, I had a life before that. I wanted for nothing growing up. Materially and emotionally, it was a different story. But 10 years ago in London, I was working for a recruiting company. And up until that point, I ticked all the boxes. I went to a good school, then came to London because that's the only place to go to after you go to any place in the UK for school. And I fell into this recruiting job. And I never grew up thinking I wanted to be a recruiter. I wanted to be a creative, or at least that was the idea that I was pursuing. I had all these ad agency internships, but even the sense of how competitive they were and this idea of trying to stand out. And it was still just so much box ticking. But I was 26 in 2016, and a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, a lot of cocaine, a lot of long days in the office, a lot of insecurity and self-worth or low self-worth, and single, and asking myself, is this really it? Is this really life? Is getting up and getting on the tube and having my face in somebody's armpit and going to make money and always feeling behind and seeing the numbers on the wall of the targets we were supposed to hit? I just was like, is this it? What am I chasing to get towards? And looking back, I was in a very depressed, dark place. I didn't really have a sense of, if you ask me what my joy was at that point, I don't even know if I could have registered the idea of joy. Now I can, different story. But at the time, the solution for me was to change. It was to change something. And the only thing that it seemed like I had any control of was my work. So I handed in my notice in March 2016. And at that point, I'd been working at that company for about 2.5 years. And it was fun. It was full of 20-year-olds making big money and London and nights out and all the things. It was fun. Not my definition of fun today, but there was a sense of belonging, of like, oh, this is what we do. We go out and we get drunk and we're all part of this community we're building and all that sense. But there was something in me which just, it didn't tick the box. So I handed in my notice, and my CEO turned around to me and said, how do you feel about going out to LA with Tom, who I'd been working with up until that point for a couple of years? He was a family friend, and he was at a similar place of, he wanted something to change. So he had proposed to the company CEO, hey, I'm going to set up the LA office, and if you don't send me, I'm going to leave the business. And he was a very, very valuable member of the team. And so circumstances happened that I was at the same time handed in my notice. And they said, well, why don't you go out to LA with Tom? I was like, okay. And that was my first experience 10 years ago of doing something brave, of not really knowing what the outcome was going to be. I was prepared at that point to hustle and, do whatever cash jobs and realize like I could sleep on friends' couches or whatever. It wouldn't be that bad, but just getting to that place of what's the worst that could happen again and again and again, and realizing, oh, the worst that could happen is I could go live with my parents who lived an hour from London, or I could stay with friends, or the worst that could happen was really not the worst that could happen. And that sense of not knowing what was coming next. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll go out to LA for, thinking it would be 6 months. having no idea of what LA was about. I didn't know that the West Side existed. I didn't know that Venice existed. I thought LA was fast cars and boobs and Hollywood and all the things. And I move out here, and it move out with 5 suitcases, and I fall in love with this place of just, maybe it's California, I think it's the US in general, but living and growing up in the UK, there was such constriction about what you were supposed to do and how things were supposed to be, and school, job, relationship, buy the house, have the kids, tick all the boxes, go on maternity leave, blah, 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 blah. And here it just seemed like there was so many possibilities of how you could live your life, of infinite potential. And I know that exists in the UK and elsewhere, but I hadn't really seen that until I lived here. And so I did the recruiting thing again for a couple of years with Tom. And then a couple of years later, because I'd been trying to scratch that itch of how do I change this? So I did the thing that I could at the time, which was going to LA. And then a couple of years into that, I realized like the itch was still there. I hadn't really scratched the itch. I was kind of doing the same thing all over again, working for someone else. Yes, it was a very different environment compared to working in a boiler room in London, but 2-3 of us in an office in LA. But the same component of, I was essentially building something for someone else. My time was owned by someone else. There was always going to be a limit on output. My vision, my autonomy, everything was really felt owned by someone else. And I felt like all of my effort and all of my time and all my creativity had to go into putting numbers on the wall. I didn't even consider that I didn't have my own time for creativity in a different way. I was so disconnected from the idea that I'm a creator being, that I have so much inside of me that wants to come out. It just didn't even register. And in 2019, I was already starting to have these feelings of like, I want out. I don't know what that's going to look like. Similarly to 3 years before that, where I was just like, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I want out. I was having those same feelings. And then Tom, who I moved out here with, he, I guess, had been having a similar experience of something ain't right, but he walked into the ocean and drowned. And that totally rocked my world in all the ways. 7 years later, is still understanding my dynamic with him, my relationship with him. And for so long, I was attached to the story of that grief and being a victim in it, and how much pain I had suffered through that journey of building a life with someone, and then, turning the whole world, feeling like it had been pulled out from underneath us. And he was by no means romantic, but he was like a soulmate in so many ways. He was a brother. He was I spent every day with him for 5-6 years. Like he knew me better than anyone else. Like I retrospectively, I didn't know how to be close or intimate with people. I didn't know how to know myself, let alone share that with other people, friends, and all those experiences. And that was really the catalyst. His death was really the catalyst for a journey of what has been relentless self-discovery for the last 7 years. And there are so many components of that journey for the last 7 years. There was, a couple of years up until that point where I was just really stuck in that. How do I get out of this life that I felt like it was killing me, felt like there was something so inherently rotten with, this isn't how I'm supposed to live. And the last 7 years I've been figuring it out of what does make me happy, what does bring me joy, what does make me want to live. And it was 8 months after Tom's death that I'd spent those 8 months using every drug I could get my hands on, and really starting to feel for the first time. I think when we talk about pain and grief, especially in Western society, it's seen as a bad thing. I see it as the greatest gift I've ever been given, because for the first time I was feeling sensation in my body. I turned 30 in February of 2020. And up until that point, I'd been numb. I'd been numb for 30 years. I didn't, pain, pleasure, joy, all the things, all these spectrums of what it means to be a human and be alive, I hadn't really touched the edges of. And when that experience for me, and I speak to others of who have these big cataclysmic events of whether it's cancer or sickness or death or, life awakening moments, it sets you on a path to see things differently. I certainly started to see things very differently. I remember wearing a bikini for the first time a couple of months after he died, because I had my level of self-worth and insecurity was so low that the way that I thought about my body and all that stuff, I hated everything. And we talk about self-love, and that journey of self-discovery has been a journey of self-love. It's been a journey of self-acceptance, of really getting to meet who I am and how I operate in the world, and learning to love her. And that doesn't mean she's perfect. She's far from perfect, but perfect in the sense of all the pieces of me are, they have a place in who I am. And yeah, initially when I talk about this point just before I hit my 30th birthday, which was my rock bottom. And there was a guy that I was obsessed with, and there was a realization that I'd been taking drugs for quite a few days, and not days, weeks, months. I had a friend who walked in, he was like, well, when was the last day you didn't get high? And I was like, and it was weed and mushrooms. And what those both served for me was, I think they are plant medicine. I think they are connected to something greater than ourselves. I was having these profoundly mystical experiences in my garden, my backyard, post Tom's death. I never grew up with a sense of God or universe or spirit or anything like that. My family was Jewish. I went to a Christian school, but if you said God or faith to me growing up, you think you're crazy. I remember there was a guy I went to college with who called himself a Catholic and who had faith, and I couldn't wrap my head around that. But in the time after Tom's death, it felt like the veil was so thin, and I would have experiences where hummingbirds would come and hover right there, or butterflies would come and sit on me. And mushrooms, especially, they started to help open up my perception. And I think grief and substances and what else? Grief and substances, they have an effect of making the veil very thin. And so I started to perceive the world differently and understand that maybe there was a greater fabric to the reality that I understood. Maybe life wasn't just ticking the boxes and going to school and getting a good job and, getting the relationship and house and the kids. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the feeling that I had in my soul for those years in London and the first couple of years in LA of knowing that something was inherently wrong, maybe there was a truth to all of that. And then I started to meet people who validated that, who started to have their own experiences of, call it waking up or awakening to God or the universe. And I called it the universe at first, because there wasn't really anyone in our immediate world who these conversations felt easy with. Now, every single person in my life, this conversation is very easy with. But at the time, it wasn't. And I remember, this happens till today, I would be driving down the street and I would see numbers or signs on billboards, and that's the song of the lyrics of what I needed to hear played on the radio. There were so many ways that the universe started to talk to me in that place. When I was in so much grief, I was high as fuck. I started to be like, oh, I'm starting to receive messages. Around the same time, I had a tarot deck, and this is a bit of a side note, but this is part of the story, and this is my story, is 3 months after his death, I was in Sayulita where I met one of my closest friends, and I'd had a tarot deck. I didn't understand what tarot meant. And you had the book inside of it, which if you pull a Four of Swords, it shows you what the Four of Swords means. And there were these two women there, Nye and Trisha. And I said to Trish, I gave Trisha a reading, thinking that I would just be pulling cards, then reading it from the book, not really knowing what the cards meant. And I shuffled the deck and these cards fell out. And then it was almost like, and I was high, and I think what being on substances allowed me was just the ease of information to flow. Because I do think information comes from, not necessarily externally, internally, but we are channels for something greater. And our words are, it's all communication. Is God trying to talk to us? I think we hear people through each other. Anyway, so we're channels for spirit. And I pull these cards for Trisha, and just suddenly out of nowhere, it was like whatever coming out of my mouth and saying, oh yes, blah, 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 this meant something, something, something. I was reading an energy, and I did that for a couple of people, and they were like, how the hell do you know that? And I didn't know how I knew that. And what I later understood is that Trisha's uncle, who was full-blown shaman, pulled cards in the same way that I did. And I think that's how, I figured this out in a much later time, I think that's how we unlock each other's gifts, is when we get witnessed by someone who's already seen something inside of us. There's a process of being witnessed by each other that unlocks certain gifts and creative powers and whatever. And for whatever reason, the fact that Trisha had witnessed her uncle reading cards, reading energy in the way that she had, she was then able to somehow witness that same skill set in me. And I do that even now today. It's like there's a practice of how do I get out of my conscious mind and open and just be a channel for spirit. And I don't talk about that too much because it feels so woo, and also relate to that time of the first couple of years of 2020 and 21. I was on the road really starting to understand, like, what is this exploration? What is really going on? And I started to, tap into like really wild experiences. And then COVID happened, and I so wanted out of my job, and there was a visa issue. I couldn't work legally in the US. I was on the road. If I left the country, I wouldn't be able to get back in. It was a whole thing, and I couldn't legally earn money. So many complications with that time. And I just wanted out. I just wanted bare bones out of this existence. And the first time that I sang or played any music in public was at Tom's Memorial. And this was in 2019. And I remember singing and looking back, I'm like, oh, how bad was it? But I remember opening my eyes and just thinking, oh, this is what I'm here to do. And so around that time when life felt like it was totally imploding, this idea of being a musician started to really ruminate in me. And that's not something that I thought I could do, because I was supposed to tick all the boxes and do all the things that other people had told me I was supposed to do. But I started calling myself a musician, and I started writing, and I followed this dream of playing at Glastonbury, because Glastonbury to me is the most badass, biggest festival there is in the UK, and what it represents is so historic. And I just had this like, I want to play Glastonbury because I can. And at that time, the idea of that happening was so far from what my reality was, which, I'd been in a desk job and hadn't written any music, let alone played for anyone or done any of those things. So to say I'm going to play Glastonbury that felt totally insane. And yet that declaration of I'm going to play Glastonbury is what I've been following for the last 7 years. And I get a text from my mum yesterday saying, oh, I met this person that wants to meet you, and she's going to connect you to the person who can make you play at Glastonbury. I'm like, okay. And I've been following that breadcrumb trail and released an album last year. And that lightness with the music for me has been so easy because there's zero expectation of like, yes, I can say I want to headline Glastonbury. How that happens, I'm so detached from. All of that was part of this story of why I'm building what I'm building today, which is Whole Collective. Because it was that time was such a crucial moment of breaking out of everything that I thought I was supposed to do, everything that I thought the world worked, how it worked and how I was supposed to be. And in the last few years, I've been learning the tools and I've been learning the way that I actually want to be in the world. So whilst 2020, 21 was such a deeply mystical, creative, getting off the bandwagon train, really understanding how do I want to feel, what lights me up, understanding that there was a yes and no in my body in every single experience. And it was trying to talk to me. My body had been trying to talk to me the entire time. And then eventually after being on the road, like the money thing was like, okay, but how my dad had been supporting me and he eventually was like, yo, this ain't happening anymore. And I crawled on my knees into a 12-step program for money in 2022 and I haven't looked back since. And the foundation of that program, as all 12-step programs are, is to build a relationship with a higher power. And it is a relationship. And what that relationship for me now is, I call it God. I call him God. And God is a big, sexy, hot man in my life who is taking care of me and I flirt with and he flirts back. And it is so cool. And to be so fluid in my understanding of and conversation about God has taken a lot of time because it is such a demonized and heavily loaded topic. And I don't relate to it in a religious sense. But if I think about the experience that I've had of the last 7 years, it's been deeply connected to nature. It's been deeply connected to a voice or an inner knowing that has been guiding me the entire time. And that voice is our creative GPS for the most fulfilling, nourishing, loving, pinch me life that we could possibly ever know. I believe that, yes, I have a dream and a desire for my life, and part of that is Glastonbury and building this business and all the stuff in between. And yet there is a plan, higher power, God has a plan for me, which is far beyond my wildest dreams. Even saying God in the US is so much easier than the UK. I feel like that was one of the components of how I felt it opened up here, especially being on the road, especially being outside of the main cities and spent a lot of time in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho in 2020, and just people who had a sense of faith. I found it so much easier to connect to them. But when I came back to LA in 22, I'm also having this back of my head feeling right now, is any of this worth sharing? And yet, like, I recognize those doubts, and when they come up, it's like, it's not for me to know why I'm sharing something. Again, the number of times that I've had people who've come up to me, because I have been writing a Substack for the last 4 or 5 years. I've been sharing pretty publicly on social to small audiences, and that's okay. But I've had so much feedback and validation from people that keep going, and that's all I'm doing really here. So this is just another practice of keep going. It's a long time speaking to yourself for this long. And what it came back to was the money, in one sense. The hiccup that I kept, why can't I figure this thing out, was the money. on one hand, I felt so fulfilled and joyful and free and was having mystical wow experiences, but I couldn't seem to figure my shit out of how do I pay rent until I started working this 12-step program. And miraculously that year, 22, I earned $78,000, was fully self-sufficient and enough to live in LA, paid my rent, did the whole thing. And I was doing work that I'd swore I would never do again, which was recruiting. It was my old roommate, Jordan, who I reached out to, willing to earn in whatever capacity, willing to do bar work. I said, do you know any jobs? He said, actually, we need to hire a CMO at Mudwater. And I was like, well, I can do that with my eyes closed. And, oh, wait, I can do it in a way that feels really good. So I returned to the recruiting piece for the last few years and have been figuring that out. And there have been so many lessons with the money. And what I've understood with now a relationship with my higher power, who is my CEO? Like, I don't have to figure everything out because I have a program, which means that I'm not alone. And I keep being shown again and again and again that there is a way through. So my higher power is my CEO, who is bringing me experiences again and again and again, which I could never have engineered. So do I believe there's something greater going on? Yes, I do, because I've had so much proof of it to show me. And this isn't a convincing you of God. This is just my own experience and my own story. And it was around that time that the idea for Whole Collective started to be born. And recruiting, jobs, of course it has a role, because what was the piece that I felt so trapped by was my job, was how I was earning money. And I look at the world, the corporate world today, and I see these shifts of what I went through myself, of feeling so trapped and feeling so disempowered, disconnected from myself, from my dreams, from my creativity, from my body, and not realizing that. There was a life that I wanted out from, but I didn't know how to get out. But changing my income stream was the route to do that. And so when I started recruiting for myself, I had ownership over my own time. The biggest hurdle was then bringing in clients and then having that momentum where it felt like, oh my God, where's the money coming in? Okay, work on this piece. But then where's the money coming in? And again and again and again, it just, I feel like so many consultants who go out on their own, they have it's a similar story. But of course, how we work, the jobs, that component plays a role. Like, I've been a recruiter for 15 years. I've spoken to really successful founders and CEOs and people who have all the money, and yet they don't have the sense of purpose or fulfillment that I had assumed they would if they had the money. And that's been a gift in so many ways, is to speak to people who have everything that I thought I wanted on paper, but they didn't have the joy or the fulfillment or the sense of purpose. And there's a reason that fractional work is blowing up right now, and it's been blowing up for a couple of years. I feel like there's a much bigger drive among the general population to have that sense of autonomy and freedom, and fractional work does allow you that. Fractional allows you to have ownership of your time, which really is the most valuable thing. Like, no salary. Like, yes, you go for a different job and you get a higher income stream, you get a bigger title, and you do the next thing and the next thing. But when your hours are contracted out to a company for a salary, you are owned. Your time is not free. And I feel like more and more people are waking up to that fact. And fractional, yes, there's still a job. Yes, you're still accountable. But the ownership of your time, rather than having a 40-hour, but really 50, maybe 60-hour work week, you get to decide that yourself. And that's what I'm seeing in this whole new workforce kind of emerging is, we know, look at all the layoffs that have happened in the last month or two, that one steady income from this big company is not steady anymore. So how do we create our own sense of safety in ourselves? And that's really been the core component of what I've been exploring myself with this whole collective thing, is how do I create safety in my nervous system? Because I have this creative outlet in the music. I have this really expressive, joyful. I write poetry, I write songs. I feel like I'm a fucking nymph in the woods. I have spent so much time outside naked under the moon, communing with the stars and the sun and all these things. The birds and the trees and the plants talk to me. I am not ashamed to say that, because it feels like that piece of myself has come alive, and it is divinely mystical, and it is so feminine and the essence of what it means to be a woman, which I feel like, especially in Western culture, has been so hidden from us. The fact that we are creators of life, the fact that I can hold so much sensation for pain, so much sensation for pleasure in my body, the fact that I can commune with a power greater than myself and feel and emote in the way that I do, like, oh my God, I will spend the next 60 years of my life understanding how lucky I am, how beautiful it is that I came to be alive on planet Earth and be a woman. Oh my God. I'm so excited to be in this body. It has taught me so much. Total sidetrack, but so important, and not in a anti-men way, because the gifts that I have learned to receive from men and give to men in these last couple of years are so divine, truly. How I thought I was supposed to be a woman, and the lack of self-worth, and I thought, how I was supposed to look and all that stuff. And really it's been a journey of self-discovery and connecting to my own value, and then getting to see that reflected back to me in my friendships and in male partners. And I have that side of myself, this creative, mystical, priestess, devotional woman that needs to feel safe in order to be that free, and expressive and connected to the higher realms, connected to pleasure, connected to that surrender, connected to God. I need to feel safe in my body and my nervous system and my relationships and my money and my community and my communication. And so the money piece, if I had a single job where my time was owned and also could be laid off at any point, I can't go play in the realms of the profoundly mystical that I so enjoy. And yet they both play a role. There's this creative part of me, but there's also this part of me that loves building. I love building shit, connecting people. I love making money. I love connecting the dots. And I think many kind of schools call that the feminine and masculine. I think we have both sides of our consciousness, which is, the feminine for me represents creativity and expression and expansiveness, and the masculine is grounded awareness, consciousness. And I have both sides of me. And when I'm activating and participating in both, like, the life that I can create and build and participate in as a co-creator is so beyond my wildest dreams. And I share all of this, firstly, because it feels like it's coming through me right now. And I can't believe I've been talking for 40 minutes. And if anybody's listening up until this point, oh my God, I can't believe you've been listening for 42 minutes. I had to go on that mystical adventure to understand how I created a life where I didn't want to kill myself. And that was my rock bottom moment in 2020, is I didn't want to be here anymore. And for the last 7 years, I've been learning to build a life that I have fallen so in love with. I have fallen so in love with myself. And the essence of Whole Collective is, well, how do I share that? And there are these different buckets, which is like, yes, it's how do you figure out the money and I'm not saying the answer is for everyone to go live in a cave, and that's not the answer for me either. It's like, I want to be in this world. I want to be able to walk to Blue Bottle and get my coffee at 6 a.m. I want to be able to live in a house which I am surrounded by friends, and I want to be able to buy shit because I love shit. The components of that journey for me has been firstly figuring out the money. How do I want to earn a living in a way which is tangible and participates in doing good shit in the world? And for me, recruiting is being a fractional recruiter, but then also building this fractional recruiting agency. And then what's the skill set that I actually really love doing is connecting people, whether it's connecting people to a company that can help it grow, or connecting people to investment, or connecting people. That's the gift that I have. But from a services perspective, it's how do you, if fractional talent is the move, how is that an offering for individuals and companies? For companies, it's much more cost effective because there are so many AI tools now that you actually don't need, a lot of smaller brands don't need people full time. I think we're moving away from this world of big corporations where you have thousands of employees to a whole load more smaller businesses solving real world tangible problems that are, 5, 10, 20 people, which is automated a lot more. There's a lot more systems and technology in place, but they're actually solving real world problems like food, health, water, all the things. Because we need it. We don't need these big archaic systems. We look at the world that, we've come out of Silicon Valley, and yes, those are still going to exist, but I'm seeing and meeting so many people who have found who've gone through a health problem, or they discovered a challenge with some particular food or way that they were living or whatever, and they're addressing a problem, building a product out of that thing. So I think there's going to be a lot more smaller companies that are solving very purpose-driven things. And for them, they won't necessarily need to hire full-time, but they will be able to hire fractional marketing, finance, HR, all that stuff. And so really the agency on the whole collective side for fractional is a proposition for companies who can hire values-aligned talent, because the talent pool that we are attracting by design is not just people who want the autonomy of working fractional, but it's the one who are actually driven by their own values, who have a sense of self, of who they are and what's important to them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that what's important to them has to be kumbaya, but having the awareness of what's important to them means that you can match with companies where there is values alignment. That's where I think the biggest feeling of trapping was for me. It was like my own values did not match the companies. So that's the first piece, is fractional agency. Makes sense. It's an obvious thing. Wrapping that up in the values and the brand piece. But the second component is nervous system. I have been on such a journey of understanding my body and the chemicals going on inside of it and how I regulate. And if I look at, all the times that I was depressed and suicidal and didn't want to be here and was miserable, like I ended up in a therapist's office after Tom died, and he was actually put on antidepressants himself, which that's a totally different conversation. I'm not saying they're inherently wrong, but I do believe that the way that we understand mental health and the tools to fix it are misguided. And I look at my own journey of the last 7 years and me being that mystical creature and diving headfirst into my own pain and learning to have a relationship with myself and understand the thoughts and my own expression. That was the solution for not wanting to die, not taking a pill. I was learning to be in my body. And then actually nothing was wrong with my body, but it was learning to build my capacity to hold the full sensations of my experience. It was learning that pain, deep agonizing pain, was not a bad thing. It was a teacher. And when those days of being funky or like in my head or such low self-worth and insecurity and all those things, there were actually so many tools that I could start to practice, which I have practiced. So, tools of nervous system regulation, and I'm surrounded in my life by so many people who are so skilled at being able to help others. So that's the second piece. And then it really ties into the AI component, which obviously is exploding right now. But I think unless we have the tools for nervous system regulation, using any AI tools is going to blow our systems out, and we're going to be in a worse place than we were before. So if the foundation of everything is growth, Whole Collective is this idea. How do we connect to this sense of creativity and purpose and use the tools that are available to actually build a life that feels so fulfilling, that brings money in a way that feels really good, that has us connected to a sense of expression and output and creativity and purpose, and feeling like we're actually here spending our lives, which could be over tomorrow, in a way that actually feels good to us. I had this line of Trojan horse in the corporate world with profound hippie shit, and it's not wrong. But actually what I understand as profound hippie shit is like, this stuff is already catapulting through a generation. People are hitting that rock bottoms en masse right now. There are people who are meeting that level of disconnection and pain in a way that forces them to wake up at such electrifying speeds. And I smile because that sounds like a very painful, sad thing. And like, not everyone's going to make it. That's just the fact. Not everyone's going to make it. And if I look at where I was in 2020 and where Tom was 8 months prior, we were in the same place. He opted out, and there was something in me that managed to hold on for long enough to just put one foot in front of the other. And if I think about what I needed to hear at that point, at that rock bottom, and what he needed to hear, if I can so assume, is that one, you're not alone. Hence, sharing. And that two, there is a way through. And for that second part, I've had to go on this journey myself of the last 7 years of, well, what was the way through? And it's not as easy as just like, okay, do 1, 2, 3, tick the box. We are such complex beings, each with our own story and traumas and environment and relational experiences. We're so unique, and at the same time we're all the same. But I had to go on this journey of understanding, well, what is that? What is that experience for someone? And Whole Collective is that output. It's this broader idea of, sharing stories, number one, and I'm about to start pushing out this content for people that I feel have been on similar journeys or similar experiences that resonate and people can relate to, because that's how we heal, is through stories, is through we are relational beings. But then secondly, what the way through, okay, well, what are the tools? Cool, here's the tools of how we can earn money in a different way that doesn't feel like you're being trapped. And then here are the tools of how you can connect to who you are and understand who you are in your body. Like, our body is no separate from our mind or our soul. Like, I think that's when we try and treat mental health, I think traditionally it's been seen as a mental thing of talk therapy. The experiences that I've had in addressing that have been so heavily rooted in somatic, but also spiritual. It's been a spiritual healing, it's been a somatic healing, and then it's been understanding the mental experience that comes from both of those places, rather than focusing on the mind. It's okay, I've had to look at the body, I've had to look at the spirit, and then the mind is almost, what's happening there is almost the byproduct. That's a great bit. Ooh, I like that. At the end of the day, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not afraid to say that. I've been following this breadcrumb trail relentlessly for the last few years. And it has arrived me at a place that I feel sexy and I feel so good in my body. And I have an album and I know who I am, and I'm not afraid to speak my truth, and I'm not afraid to connect with people, and I'm not afraid to be on stage, and I'm not afraid to talk for an hour with, I don't know, I'm not afraid to go after what I want because I know what I want. And life has turned into this most magical, truly magical, holy adventure that is a life of joy. And it sounds so trite to call it that, but so many people I've spoken to who've been in a similar place had Leah in a year ago. And she said the same thing, which is like, once you feel that feeling of freedom, and I feel that's the feeling that I feel free. The only thing that I want to do is share that. It feels like that's the rest of my life, is sharing this feeling of being free. Because for 30 years I felt so unfree. I felt so trapped. And me feeling free is the most joyful expression I could possibly have. And when I'm in that place, opportunities and arrive and doors open and things that I could never have anticipated or predetermined arrive. And that is the magic of living. And I truly believe that's available for everyone. And yes, I know that there's a trite thing of, we have poverty and all the things. And there's a responsibility, I think, of us to find the joy in our own lives. And then by default, all the problems of the world that we have in hunger and environment and all the stuff, I believe every problem that we have on the planet is solvable through our own creativity. And creativity is found when we are in our joy. And it's the most infectious thing that I know. I'm going to headline Glastonbury. I know it. And it may be 80 years from now, if I'm still alive. I may be 80. I may be in another lifetime, maybe. But I think that's the gift of being alive, is that we get to be so outrageous in our desires and our dreams because our desires are holy. They've been placed in us for a reason. And maybe today is my last day. And maybe I get hit by a bus tomorrow, touch wood I don't, because I got some shit to do. The only regret I have is I never told Tom I loved him. I didn't have that expression within me. I now tell every friend that I love them the whole time. Love pours out of me. But I loved him so much in a, whatever way. I don't need to explain it. To be an overflowing cup of love and expression is a prayer for myself. Love is, it's all we got. All I have is this moment right now to be fully surrendered to it. That I get to be here in this body, that I get to be here in this camera with the lights and whatever. This whole place arrived miraculously in the most wild